Thanks everyone for joining us today. Unfortunately, today's stream is going to be very quick because the Parliament has decided to postpone the debate on the amendment once again. So it's going to be postponed until October, and I suppose I'll see everyone at that point. As far as the amendment goes, there's no real indications on what sort of direction everything's going to go on because it's not going to be discussed today. No, none of the amendments were actually submitted to Parliament, so we just don't really have much more information than we had for most of the summer. So once again, fortunately, it's just going to be just postponed at this point. So let me see the chat if anyone has any questions. Yep. Well, it's just how it is, unfortunately. I'm going to change the stream settings a little bit so that I get a little quicker responses. Okay. Unfortunately, that's just how it is at this point. It was not brought up at all. Actually, it was they basically just came out with the decision to postpone it. So unfortunately, it was just postponed. There was no sort of substantive discussion on it at all. Wasn't even discussed, to be honest. Actually, they just postponed it procedurally, and that's pretty much it. So that's the headline here. Unfortunately. Okay. It's going to be postponed till October, till the next session. And so the next session is actually going to start on, let me look this up. It's pretty much after this session, so mid-October, I believe. But let me get this exactly right. And again, we won't know the exact day when this is going to be discussed. We're just going to be able to know the session. So yeah, so the session starts on the 19th of October and ends on the 5th of November. So it will be discussed sometime between the 19th and the 5th. I would assume they would want to put it sort of more in the front than in the back, since it's already been postponed 3 times, unfortunately. Right. So the date would be sometime between the 19th and the 5th of November. The 19th of October till the 5th of November. I actually switch the screens here, so I got a better view of the questions. There we go. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask. Right, exactly. So between the 19th of October till the 5th of November. Yep. And anything you want to ask, anything unrelated even to the amendment today, any citizenship questions? I'm going to stick around for about another 10 minutes just to make sure everyone who gets here will know that what's going on. So feel free to ask me anything you want. Yes, this is actually an advantage on that part. It will give us more time, definitely, to reach out to members. I think it might be worth reaching out to Mr. Kalus and Mr. Kochuk from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well, and to try to change as many minds as we can on this. I've myself gotten some encouraging responses from MPs. I know some of the people who have been explaining, who have been sending emails out, got some interesting answers as well. So we definitely have more time to reach out to people, which is good in that sense. So we have one more month, but I'd rather it be over with now, and we'd finally know the result, as opposed to waiting until November possibly, but we'll have to see. Could I explain the 904 issue? Right. So the 904 issue is sort of a kind of a very arbitrary cutoff point for people who have emigrated from what is today Slovakia, was at the time the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or more precisely the Kingdom of Hungary. And the Kingdom of Hungary at the time, they had citizenship laws which stipulated that if you were abroad, if you weren't present in Hungary for over 10 years, then you would lose your citizenship. And the 1904 issue basically would be that anyone who immigrated prior to 1904, their 10-year period of being absent from Hungary, or from Slovakia, but at the time it was Hungary, basically that period would have ran out before 1914. And 1914 was the decisive year because that's where World War I started. And according to Hungarian jurisprudence, according to an article that I've read, war actually, and this is the way it's interpreted in Hungary in general, war actually paused and suspended the application of this rule. And so anyone whose 10-year period when leaving Hungary elapsed after the war had already begun, they would not have lost their citizenship prior to World War One, and the whole duration of World War One, which for our purposes would be from 1914 till 1920, because that's where the peace treaty was signed with Hungary, the Peace of Trianon. Basically, this entire period would not count towards that person's absence. And then in June, was it July? Either June or July of 1920, Czechoslovakia passed the amendment to the constitution and basically established who was a citizen of Czechoslovakia. And so if the person left after 1904, there would have been no way that by absence alone they could have lost their Hungarian citizenship. And so in 1920, they would have still been a Hungarian citizen. And the laws in Czechoslovakia, they didn't really use the citizenship, they used something else, but it was connected to the citizenship. You couldn't really have one without the other. And so if someone was a Hungarian citizen in 1920, they would have automatically become a Czechoslovak citizen. By Hungarian citizen, I mean a Hungarian citizen who came from what is now Slovakia, or what became at the time Czechoslovakia. And so anyone who left prior to 1904, they would have lost their Hungarian citizenship before World War One, and before the decisive point where people automatically, just by virtue of law, would have become Czechoslovak citizens in Slovakia. And so if your ancestors left prior to 1904, then they would have lost their citizenship and they could have never become Czechoslovak citizens. And if they left after 1904, then just by the reason of absence alone, they couldn't have lost their Hungarian citizenship, and hence they became Czechoslovak citizens in 1920, and that makes you eligible, right? Regardless of what happened to their citizenship afterwards, it would make you eligible under this proposed amendment. So that's something to keep an eye out on. But there's other factors as well. There's for women, for instance, they would lose their Hungarian citizenship by marriage. So even if a woman immigrated after 1904, if she got married in, say, 1910 or 1911, that would have still been a problem because she would have then lost her citizenship if she married someone who was not from the Hungarian part of Austria-Hungary. And so she could, and her residence, so to speak, her municipal citizenship, or the right of residence, which is something I've talked about in my article, which was sort of a subset of the main citizenship that people had at the time. They would also change for women automatically just by marriage. So if a woman emigrated from Slovakia, as I said, 1911, and they got married a couple of months later to someone who was not a Hungarian citizen, to someone who was not from Slovakia, she would also lose her citizenship that way. But then on the other hand, you also have minors, for instance. So if a minor immigrated prior to 1904, but they were not of age, which at the time was 24 years old, they would not have been affected by the 1904 rule, and they would have been basically, they would have retained their citizenship because the 10-year period only started to be counted from the day that they turned 24. And so if they turned 24 after 1904, then they also wouldn't have lost their Hungarian citizenship and they would have become Czechoslovak citizens automatically in 1920. This is really like complicated, complex stuff. So I really recommend reading the article that I wrote on this topic. I'm going to link it in the comments. Just one sec. Because I could talk about this for 3 hours and it would make your head explode. So I really do recommend reading that article that I wrote because it explains everything that I've just told you in detail, and it's, I guess, just sort of much easier to digest in writing than it is in uh, when I talk about it, because again I can talk about it for a very long time. And there's a lot of concepts that we just don't have anymore, that just don't exist. Nothing even close to them exists, and I've explained those concepts in that blog. So you'll be able to check it out and hopefully make more sense than just me babbling about it. So there it is. There's my blog. Let's see something else. Yes, the specific date for 1904, it's also in my blog, and it's basically 10 years to the day from the start of World War One. So that would be anyone who left on or after July 29th, 1904. So again, it's July 29th, 1904, wouldn't lose their Hungarian citizenship by absence alone. But again, there could have been other reasons why they could have lost their citizenship, and there could have been other reasons why they could have retained their citizenship. So it's really important to look at each case individually, but the general rule is this. So the answer to your question is it's on or after July 29th, 1904. You're welcome. You're welcome. The Mad Mind of Mitch asks, so if a female ancestor got married in 1930 but was already a Czechoslovak citizen, that would still make me eligible. Uh, yes, I mean, if she was a Czechoslovak citizen, regardless of what happened to her citizenship afterwards, she would have been eligible. But if, uh, yeah, right. Yeah, it wouldn't matter. I mean, so long she was a Czechoslovak citizen, that either if you have proof or just by circumstances, that's what it was. And she was a Czechoslovak citizen after 1920 when the citizenship came to be. Then what happened afterwards, from the perspective of the proposed law, is really irrelevant. The law just says a Czechoslovak citizen ancestor. So whether she lost it by marriage or by absence or whatever happened to it, is no longer relevant. The years are only relevant prior to the creation of Czechoslovak citizenship. Once Czechoslovak citizenship was created, um, and you can show that the ancestor held it, that's it. That's all you need to show. What happened afterwards was just not necessarily relevant, unless, of course, circumstances are such that you would qualify for citizenship, by descent, in a way where the citizenship, where the links wouldn't have been broken. But very few people would have qualified that way. But if you do qualify that way, then that's the easiest path to Slovak citizenship. But yeah, but if your ancestor got married in 1930 as a female, then you definitely qualify for the proposed amendment. Uh, is the 1904 date part of the discussion on the amendment? No, the 1904. I mean, this is just my opinion, but the 1904 issue is something that I think very few people think about. I mean, the things that I talk about in my article are the concepts are so ancient and so niche and unique that, there's not many people who will be familiar with them. And there's not many people who will be familiar with the effects of this law would be. So no, 1904 is not something that people would generally think about. Uh, they, to be honest, I mean, this law was created more in mind with sort of more recent immigrants from Czechoslovakia than 48 or in 68, perhaps before World War II, but, it wasn't really intended to cover people who left before Czechoslovakia was created, because, uh, those who drafted the law, in my opinion, once again, I thought about people who became Czechoslovak citizens while they were absent. Even though it's perfectly legal, perfectly fine, it's how it happened. My own great grandfather actually became a Czechoslovak citizen while he lived in the U.S. in 1920. Lots and lots of people became citizens automatically while they were abroad, and it was legally no different from someone who would have been, in Czechoslovakia, in 1920. So, so even though this is something that is logical and makes sense and it just follows from the law, it's just not something that they would have thought about. Uh, is rodný list, so the birth certificate, enough to establish citizenship? No, unfortunately, a rodný list is not enough to establish citizenship, but it can help you establish the circumstances, regarding someone's citizenship. It also really depends on what exactly the record says. So what the original record says, because if you look at hold on, let me get a birth certificate. If you look at a Slovak birth certificate, so here's one. So this is my great grandpa's birth certificate. I believe, yeah, my great grandpa's. So he's been 6 feet under for a long time, so I don't think he minds his personal data being shared. So here is a Slovak birth certificate, and as you can see, It has his date of birth, his place of birth, his name, his gender, his parents, name, birth name, age, and that's about it. Modern birth certificates like this one, they actually have a little field for citizenship. But back in the day, citizenship usually would not have been recorded. What could have been recorded is this other concept of the right of residence, or what I like to call the sort of village citizenship. And if it does have that, even if it's from a very long time ago, that would be very, very, very helpful to establish citizenship. But again, that's not something that would be included on a modern certificate like this that you got issued recently. That would be something that you would have to go and look into the actual record and see what it actually says. Some might say it's, but most generally wouldn't. So a revenue list is a good start. It's necessary to sort of establish the circumstances of the person, but it doesn't necessarily establish citizenship. So third generation descent would include anyone regardless of immigration date. No. The third generation descent, the way that the law is, the way that the amendment is phrased, is it really just talks about someone's ancestor. I like to break it down into like four requirements. The first requirement is that it was either a parent, a grandparent, or a great grandparent. The second requirement is that they held at some point Czechoslovak citizenship. The third requirement uh, is that they were born in Slovakia, in what is now Slovakia, what is now Slovak territory. And the last requirement is that you have a residence permit. That is as it stands, as it was proposed. And so the emigration date is only relevant insofar as it establishes that person's whether or not that person could have become a Czechoslovak citizen. So it's only relevant for people who left prior to 1920. Anyone who left after 1920 would have been presumably a Czechoslovak citizen and would have left on a Czechoslovak passport. And so for those people, the date of emigration makes no difference. 1904. I'm not quite sure what you mean, like for your grandmother. So 1914. Do you mean like if she immigrated in 1914? Because if she did and she didn't get married or didn't naturalize, that's another huge aspect for people who immigrated to the United States. Naturalization prior to 1920 would have also been a problem. So if your grandfather immigrated grandfather, I said grandmother before. So if your grandfather immigrated in 1914, didn't naturalize, didn't do anything that would make him lose his citizenship, but as a man, there was very little he could do other than naturalize. So if he just remained a Hungarian citizen until 1920, just by doing nothing at all, in 1920 he would have become a Czechoslovak citizen. So long that he held the municipal residence or the village citizenship in a place that is now Slovakia. Uh, I mean, the 1904 thing is still a hurdle. I think it will still take some convincing to get people to recognize that, even if that someone who left in 1904 after 1904 has become a Czechoslovak citizen in their absence, even though it's obvious. It's just how the doctrine is. It's just how the jurisprudence is and always has been. A lot of bureaucrats, they just like to make their life easy, and they're like, okay, give us a Czechoslovak passport. If you don't have one, maybe don't bother us. So I think it will take a little bit of convincing with some bureaucrats to sort of show no, Czechoslovak passports are not the only thing that can prove someone's citizenship. It's actually the circumstances that matter. It's not necessarily the documents, although the documents obviously establish the circumstances. But there's not just one single document that unequivocally shows a person to be a citizen that you just can't do without. That's just not how it works. But again, if you have unequivocal proof like a passport, then that's just going to be the easiest way to do it. All right. Okay, so it's almost 3 o'clock over here. Okay, I'm going to give you guys 5 more minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. If not, then at 3:05. So in about 5 minutes, I'm gonna end the stream. If there's anyone who's already come over and doesn't know what the heck is going on, unfortunately, the Parliament had to, or they didn't have to, but they did. They postponed the amendment. So at this point, we're going to be waiting until October. The next session starts on October 19th. It's a good question, Parvies. I don't know. Would you know how much would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Because I don't know. And it was really postponed sort of last minute. We did have some indications earlier on that perhaps it might be postponed, but everything official, everything on the Parliament's website pointed to it being discussed today. I mean, we never came this close. It was always postponed before it appeared on the docket, so to speak. So it's sort of strange that they would do this so last minute. As to your question, is there any rationality behind the delays? It's just really hard to say. There have been some things going on with the anti-corruption campaign, with the police, the inspector general of the police, that have been really overshadowing a lot of what's going on in Slovakia right now. So it's possible they just want more time and more room to discuss current affairs. It's possible that that's what's going on. Difficult to say. It's just been really sluggish, unfortunately, and it's not uncommon for laws to just take a long time. And this is something where there's been some back and forth between some key stakeholders in the government, in the coalition party. So this law is not coming up. It's not coming easy, unfortunately. How likely will this ever go through? Well, I mean, I've always said this. It's a coalition proposal, so I think so long the coalition holds, so long the government holds, I think this is quite likely to actually go through. Whether the amendment that we want, whether whether they'll waive the residence requirement, will go through or not, that's difficult to say. That's it's just very hard to sort of guess. What is the attitude towards Americans who want to pursue dual citizenship? I think, to be honest with you, I think most people just wouldn't really think about this question. I suppose some people might be opposed to it. Some people might think that citizenship is too valuable to just be given to people who have a little bit of ancestry. Then again, there's a lot of people. There's virtually no one in Eastern Slovakia, dare I say, who doesn't have some sort of immigrant in their family, and maybe even in all Slovakia. I mean, whether it's modern from like 1968 or 1948 after the communists came to power, or back in the late 1800s or the early 1900s, everyone in this country at some point has some sort of relative who emigrated. So I think it's going to strike a chord with a lot of people, but Slovaks aren't generally used to the idea of people coming here from countries like the U.S. or just being interested in Slovakia and Slovak citizenship in general. So to a lot of people, most people wouldn't think about it, but to a lot of people, it'd be like a very, very new idea that they just never really gave much thought. All right. If there's no more questions, I think this is where I'll end it. So yeah, not today. I suppose I'll see you in October. Bye.